That's not a good start.
So I have 6 weeks to build a kitchen island. That sounds like a lot of time, but for me, the days I'll have to work on it will be very limited.
We gotta go, 15 minutes, get in the shower.
The items requested for this build are wheels for it to roll around, it needs some shelves for storage, and it needs to be made out of walnut. My friend that wants this island has marble to incorporate that came from her family's house that had to be burned down.
So no pressure.
The island also needs to have drawers, and it needs to be able to store a few bottles of wine. I've made a few mistakes.
So I'm an idiot.
I mean, I have no idea what I'm doing. I've never built anything like this before.
I started with an expensive pile of walnut. First I cut out the legs, and then I was very careful to find and put aside the nicest pieces to grain match the front and the drawer faces. I have a design idea in mind, but no real plans. With the legs cut out, I started picturing the final product a little more. Having creative freedom is awesome and it makes it a lot more fun to build, but it does make the build slower as I have no plan to follow. I will also have to make things up as I go since I couldn't make some important decisions before I started. There are so many different ways to build things, and I want my work to keep improving, and I want my work to last and not fall apart. I decided to build a frame for the drawers out of plywood to save costs and to minimize wood movement. For the drawer supports, I decided to use some really nice pre-finished maple ply my neighbor gave me. These are pieces that will be seen. For the side-to-side stretcher pieces, I used some scrap pieces that used to be on the wall at our gym. These I don't think will be seen as they will be under the drawers and covered by the top. With my dado blade set ready, I cut dados on the inner 2 support pieces. I used dominoes for the joints, and I was happy with how things were going until I started imagining the big piece of marble sitting on top of this, and I realized that it wasn't going to be as strong as I wanted it to be, so I decided to take a few steps back. I tore this apart and added dados to each of the supports and not just the middle piece. I also decided at this point that there would be 2 bigger drawers and not 3 smaller drawers. To make all the dado cuts the same, I taped all the supports with blue tape. I didn't swap the dado blade in this time, so I ended up with some pretty sloppy cuts. I enjoy using my chisels, but using a template bit is a faster and easier way to clean up this mess. This video is about building this walnut cart. It's also about finding balance with the things we want to do and the things we need to do. I work during the day at my main job, and then some evenings I coach classes at a gym that I love. Work is my biggest obstacle, but I have to pay the bills. It probably sounds crazy to be stressed about finishing this in 6 weeks, but life pulls me in many directions. To me, 6 weeks translates into a bunch of partial days where I actually have time to work on this. Having a hard deadline is really making me freak out a little bit. Getting into the second week of this project, I started by adding walnut edge banding to the drawer frame front edges. To do this, I cut a 1/4 inch groove in the center of the plywood and on the back of the walnut strip edges. I did this to add more glue surface, but also to make them stronger and easier to glue on. Since I was working on adding walnut to the edge of the plywood I was using, I cut out the drawer boxes next. I knew what size the drawers would be with the drawer frame completed. Spending time getting this step out of the way helped give me time to make some other decisions on design features, like how the shelves on the top would be attached to the cart frame. I didn't want to have the frame all glued together without those things decided upon first. I used my tiny bandsaw to resaw strips for the drawer side edge banding. I wanted a thicker look with contrasting wood because I thought it would look cool. I mean, almost everything on this cart is walnut, so why not? I used the opposite method by cutting the groove in the center of the walnut, which was a mistake because getting clean cuts on the edges of the plywood was a lot harder to do. I did end up getting nice cuts with a little hassle. I did it this way to make the walnut strips look even thicker. To glue the strips on, I started by using these bandy clamps, which are really handy. I then used tape to keep them all in place overnight as the glue set. The last step was to use the flush trim bit to cut the trim flush. I quickly realized that I needed a sled with a fence to put the drawer sides up against to make this job much more simple. The router table fence didn't work for me because both sides of the trim needed to be cut. This solution took a few minutes to put together, but it was worth it in the end as this edge trim will be seen every time the drawers are open. Finally, I got to work on the walnut frame. I started with the side stretchers and legs. I did some pre-sanding and I put a very slight round over on each piece. I cut the side pieces the same width I was planning on having the drawer faces and the front frame to keep a continual look as you walked around the cart, but then I changed my mind. I got another design change. I decided to go with this 1 inch instead of 1.5 inches. This piece 1 inch instead of 1.5 inches. So now my whole top section is going to be thinner, about 1 inch. So my side pieces over here, I need to rip those down to make them the same width. So that was an easy change, although as you can see, I already cut slots for the domino joints, so I would have to redo those. I didn't want to resand with the slight offset I was using for the joints, so I used a bunch of blue tape to mark all the joint locations on. Domino has lots of cool features. For the side pieces, I used 20 millimeters. Then the posts, I went to 22 to create that little bit of an offset, just the 2 millimeters. There are going to be a lot of shots of the Festool domino in this video. I used it a lot on this build. It does make the project easier and faster. Dowels can be used or pocket holes. They could all be hidden on the backside or on the bottom of almost every joint in this project. Thought about putting a rabbet in these side pieces to hold the shelves, like so, but it wouldn't have left much room for my domino. I was a little bit worried about strength. I tried really hard to finish my work early each day. If I get my work done quicker, I can get home sooner. Sometimes I did and I got a little extra work done in the shop, and sometimes I didn't.
Hey, I'm home early. I'm gonna go work in the...
It's your turn to watch the kids.
If only I knew what I was doing. Getting into the 3rd week of this project, I could already tell that I wasn't as far along as I wanted to be. I had most of the design and build operation figured out in my head, but not all of it. The loose ends and undotted I's in my imagination made me very worried. This piece is a spacer that I'm gluing to the side of the legs for more surface area to go up against the plywood drawer frame. These spacers will not be glued to the skirt of the walnut frame. Once the glue set up on those, I moved on to finally gluing up the sides of the cart. With the small roundover on the legs and the small offset that was about the same depth as the roundover, it made it really important and also a lot of work to get the glue wiped out of these small little areas. After one side was glued up, I did the same to the other, and I cleaned up a bunch more glue. Looking back, it might have been worth it to pre-tape the roundovers on each leg to keep the squeeze out from the joint pushing up into those curved surfaces. Next, I needed to do the final cuts for the front and back pieces of the frame. Using a stop block is the best way for me to make sure that each piece is the same length. I realized that my crosscut sled is now slightly off, so that meant using the track saw for every crosscut that is too wide for my non-sliding miter saw. I did some pre-sanding again and added the same roundover to each part. All right, I got this upside down. This is going to be a drawer face. We got the drawer frame. I have the reveal set right here, about how I want it in the front. Drawer frame is a little bit too wide to make the reveal in the back match up with the reveal in the front, or I might need to lose a little bit of the thickness of my back support there or my drawer frame here in the front. Let's figure this out. I did a little bit of sanding to make sure the drawer frame was square and flat. It definitely needed some fine tuning. I then ended up using the planer to dimension the drawer faces and the back skirt piece to the thickness I originally planned for. My measurements were actually pretty spot on. Next, I needed the joints for the front and back section cut so the whole frame can finally be glued together. So this domino and this domino will line up with the reference tab. For the bottom one, I referenced the bottom to the tab here, but I don't have a spot here to reference from, so I'm going to use the domino, line it up, make a mark, and then I'm going to take a measurement from the top down to this line, top down here, make a line to make a domino here, this connection here. So I am an idiot. After putting those dominoes for the back piece, then put them for the front piece too, and this is gonna be a drawer that opens and closes. I'm gonna have to fill those every time you open the drawer. You're gonna be able to see that. Before figuring out that fix, I added the mortise for the small cross piece that will sit just below the drawer faces. The spacing needs to be exact because the grain on the drawer faces will match the pieces on the frame that will cross just below and above them. I really want the gaps to look tight when the drawer faces go on, so this is all super important. To fix the huge mistake I made when I put the mortises in the wrong place with my Domino machine, I started by ripping and planing some walnut to the width and thickness of a 5mm Domino. I found the right amount of roundness I needed at the router table, and then I did some pretty fine tuning with my block plane. Gluing these in was pretty straightforward, and this fix went really well. It cost me some time, but it ended up hardly being noticeable at all. Off camera, I got the front and back sections glued into the two sides to finally get the frame put together. Glue ups for me are rarely uneventful. I think this one was only because I didn't have the camera rolling. This is the clamps coming off, and it is the end of the 3rd week. So giving myself 6 weeks to build this thing, I'm at the end of my 3rd weekend. That gives me 2 weekends left before it needs to be delivered. And there's still a bunch of things where I don't know how it's gonna be finished yet. I don't have the top done, I don't have the middle shelf done, I don't have the bottom shelf done, I don't have the casters on. I have drawer faces, the drawer frame. Somehow I'm going to use this marble for the top, mix it with the walnut. For the shelves, I'd like to run all the grain going this way. I just can't because I don't have enough lumber. Like I said earlier, this marble was imported and then removed and saved from the family's house that had to be burned down because of a bad mold problem. To cut it to the size I needed, I used a diamond blade that I already had. It took some time and multiple short passes for each cut. To match the roundover of the walnut on the ends, I used a grinder and a cutoff wheel. The long cut didn't end up as clean as I wanted it to be, but it was worth it to have the marble the same width as the 2 pieces of walnut. To clean up the marble afterwards, I did some wet sanding with the 1000 grit sanding pad.
Now that I have the marble cut to a pretty precise 8 inches wide, I can cut 2 more strips of walnut for the top, both at 8 inches, so it'll be thirds and I'll have an even look. With the offcuts of that walnut, I can use those to make a nice lip to support the shelves and put those on the inside of the shelf supports. My plan is to make the support this thickness and then the shelf this thickness for that reveal. I also need to build up more strength at the bottom to support the casters. So this is the top, but the bottom is exactly the same without this support. And you can see the casters don't fit correctly on here anyways. But once I build out that lip on both these angles on the bottom, then the caster will be able to fit nicely on there and it'll be a nice strong base.
The shelf supports are pretty simple. I ripped strips, I put the same round over on them, and then I glued them in with the face grain facing up to match the side supports. Again, I used dominoes and glue, and then I used almost every clamp that I own. This is really the first time in a while that I needed more clamps. I really don't want to mess up any of these cuts. This wood is so expensive. It's so far to go to the store and back to get more, and I'm out of time. I only had enough long pieces of walnut to go side to side on one of the shelves. The other, I needed the grain direction to go from front to back so I could use the shorter cutoffs from all the other long pieces that I had already cut. I thought this would fit the design well anyways, and a way I would really be happy with. My wife wasn't home, so I enlisted the help of my daughter to set the frame onto the drawer frame. I have stood on this table before, so I knew I wouldn't have a problem holding her weight. Bend over. Right in the middle. Watch out for your toes. Nice. In the shot, you can see where I repaired the domino mistake and where I screwed the 2 frames together. Once it's flipped back over, the screws won't be very visible. At this point, I had many loose ends to tie up. I already had the drawer sides ready with the walnut edges, so I just needed to cut out the bottoms for the drawers and then glue them all together. For these boxes, I kept the design really simple. After dialing in a test cut how I wanted it, I used the router table to cut dados into the sides for the bottoms, and then they all got glued together. Side-mounted drawer slides are easy with some practice. I use a few spacers to get them level, square, and in the correct spots. When I screwed my slide to the drawer box, I made the mistake of not double-checking my screw depth. I poked a few tips through the side before I realized what I'd done. I took the screws out and nipped the tips.
Nip the tip. Who's first?
I'm rolling into my final week for this project. In a week from now, it's got to have finish on it. It's got to be delivered for a party. The top, I got the marble cut, but I need to get the walnut finished and attached. I need to get the drawer faces done. I need to get the middle shelf done, the bottom shelf. I need to get wheels on here. It's got to be able to roll around. And it's still got to store wine. The wine shelf is still going to be a thing. I got to get to work. Let's do it. Here I'm working on the top. I'm just matching the length of the marble that I already cut. So just use a big square, drew some lines, matched the edge on that side, drew the lines here. I'm going to cut them so they're all the same length. Actually, so I could cut them to length on the miter saw, I ripped them to width first. I put a slight under bevel with the track saw. I thought it would give it a cleaner look from the top since the marble wasn't cut perfectly. I then ripped the 8 inches I wanted on the table saw. Then I made the final cuts to match the length of the marble. To finish off the shelves, I marked where the legs would be on the end pieces and cut out notches for them. I wanted the sides to look really clean and tight since having different sections would make enough room possible for future grain expansion. I definitely don't want these pieces popping out when the grain expands. It's a little hard to see, it's dark right there, but that is too wide. But I'm going to rip a tiny bit off of this to make it fit in tighter. The bottom shelf needed a little glue up. This is how close I was on having enough wood. I hid this piece in the back so it wouldn't be seen. For the wine storage, I ended up going with the design that is removable by 4 screws in case it ever needs to be removed. I just started piecing it together in a way that I thought would look nice. I thought the front should look smooth, so I put a curve on each of the front pieces. Using an oscillating sander would have been easier, but I don't use it much and I don't like to set it up. I determined the spacer size I needed to correctly space everything to hold the wine bottles the way I wanted to. I used the spacer to evenly mark out each support, and then I cut a shallow and oversized dado to make an easier, more accurate layout and glue up. I did resort to using some small brad nails to keep everything together while the glue set up. So this is the frame for the drawers. I'm thinking about running a support piece here and one back here that I can hang the wine shelf from. And then I think I'm going to put screws that go through here into this piece that I just showed up here. That way it could be removed if needed. I'm going to keep this quick, but sanding and then scrubbing every inch of walnut with finish and then wiping it all off was a bit of work, but it was totally worth it. I have 3 days to go till delivery day. I needed to get finish on everything so that it could cure as much as possible before delivery. I found out that there are going to be over 120 people at this party, and this kitchen island cart, drink cart, will be featured as the main drink location for all the thirsty people. Ensuring that the drawer faces lined up really well was a big concern of mine. I ended up giving them a little trim. I struggled when my gaps were too tight. It didn't end up perfect, but no one will ever notice unless they watch this video. After adding the thicker shelf lips to the bottom of the cart, I was much less worried about the casters. I knew they would fit, so it was just a matter of marking the hole locations and pre-drilling them for screws. I didn't really like that hole too much, or this one that was a little bit offset, so I just moved them over. There's going to be a 3/4 inch screw in this one, so I need to only go down a little bit. Deeper screws in the other 3.
I definitely didn't want to put screws all the way through anywhere, so I ended up using 2 3/4 inch screws and 2 of the 1 1/4 inch screws that the casters came with. To attach the marble, I marked the center section and added liquid nails to the plywood strips that I pocket screwed to the frame. That way it could be unscrewed at some point if ever needed. The walnut on the top got attached with Z-clips at all these locations that I added earlier. This was the most challenging and frustrating part of this build, just getting the screws in on those Z-clips. With the top on, I added the wine shelf and then I put the drawers back in. And at this point, it was ready for delivery.
That is so cool!
I needed to finish this build in time for a big party that our friend threw for her birthday, but it was really for her to show gratitude to her friends and family. I want to express gratitude for the opportunity to spend time doing things that I love with people that I care about. At this point, I realized that time is our most valuable thing. There's nothing more important than good health and surrounding ourselves with people and activities that make our time more enjoyable. I love my family and our friends, our gym family. I love being a provider and I love paying our bills on time. This was a really fun build and I appreciate the opportunity to make something out of such beautiful material. Hopefully I'll be making something awesome again soon.